Hello, welcome to Reimagined with Robin and happy holidays. Reimagined with Robin is a live conversation with a leader who is working to reinvent how we interact with the world that we live in, from reimagining emotional intelligence to modern sales and more. And today we are live with Liang Zhao, and we're going to talk about reimagining our own personal brands. So having a personal brand means being a star of your own show so that others can learn more about you. And, it may not always feel comfortable to put yourself out there. I feel that way all the time. But maintaining a personal brand matters more than ever in today's digital age. Before we begin, in the audience, can you think about when was the last time you worked on your personal brand or updated your own brand narrative? We're lucky to have Liang here, who is the founder and CEO of Vansary, a boutique marketing and public relations agency, elevating executive profiles and spearheading launch and growth initiatives from top-tier venture capital firms and B2B technology companies, as well as fintech companies, which was how we initially got connected. Her diverse professional background encompasses working with Fortune 500 companies, startups, SMBs, and investors. So, Liang, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robin. Excited to be here.
Thank you for taking the time out, like right before the holidays. But I really feel like this is a topic that is so important for all of us heading into 2024. I would love for you to I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself first. I don't do it justice. So if you could just tell us about who you are and maybe your own brand narrative.
That sounds good. So there's definitely a long form version of it, but in short, I'm Chinese by birth. I was born in Luoyang, Henan, which is about central China, which now markedly is more prevalent on the map, given that it's just north of Wuhan. So the pandemic definitely put my province on the map. But so I was there until the early 90s. My father really was the one who brought my family to the United States. Both my parents are acupuncturists by trade. They were the only doctors in our family on both sides. Everybody else were engineers and bankers. And my grandparents were even like, you're not going to make any money in like medicine in China, since, acupuncturists in China, it's not like the doctors here where they're paid very handsomely. There's an insurance, system to support it. And rather in China, each doctor gets paid about 600 to 700 yuan each month. And so they're pretty much like on the lower end of the income bracket. Not so much anymore, but this was the case in the early 90s. So that led my father to doing a 2-year medical expedition in Sudan. And that's where it really opened his eyes to what the rest of the world looked like. He met so many expats. And he was like, you know what? It's time for us to move abroad. And it was the United States that gave him a visitor's visa. And it was also his number one choice. And 3 months after he came home and was home in China for 3 months. And that's when he was like, you know what? It's time. So since 1997, my dad has been in the US. My mom and I joined him when I was 9 or so. Neither of us had any English whatsoever. I started out in second grade as a total non-English speaker, just started hanging out with kids and just interacting in school. Always had great math skills since, I am Chinese, but just kidding. But so my teachers there, though, very quickly recognized that I was a really good Chinese dancing style performer. And it was second grade actually that we had it was like a culture fair where like I ended up performing a traditional Chinese dance, and it ended up landing on the front page of our local journal, the Albuquerque Journal. And that really was like my first taste of branding, visibility, and what that could potentially mean. My mom still has it framed in the kitchen. Pretty proud of it, actually. I'm wearing traditional
That's amazing.
dance, yeah. And I did a fan dance too, so that was really, really cool. But that really propelled my, professional as well as educational journey, because that was a huge help in me getting into the top tier private school in New Mexico, Albuquerque Academy, and being around, driven other kids really allowed me to kind of excel and educationally and really push myself educationally here in the United States. And that kind of like charted the course for the rest of my life. And so from a professional standpoint, I went to Tulane undergrad, fell into fintech early on at the age of 19. I started interning at a fintech company called the Receivables Exchange. And this was definitely before, fintech was a thing in the late 2000s. And like, that was really my first taste of it. I was like, what is this like technology? What is this marketplace that's bringing buyers and sellers of accounts receivable together? And like, that was really what opened my eyes to it. But yeah, that's exactly how I got into fintech, got super interested in it. Fast forward, as you had mentioned, I worked with SMBs, Fortune 500 companies. And it really opened my eyes to exactly what are the opportunities that various companies see, and what are, I would say, kind of hurdles that they also need to overcome. And some of it really comes down to branding. How do you present yourself? How does each company present itself? What do the customers, their audience, their investors need to know about themselves in order for them to really accomplish their own business objectives? And my own personal path really encompassed many what I would see now as hurdles in my own visibility and own brand narrative that I didn't take control of. I definitely was seen as like a really great worker bee. I was, great at nurturing relationships, which is why I ended up in many account management roles. But it wasn't until I would say like 7 years ago when I started seeing more and more people around me kind of build businesses, start developing things, becoming leaders, that I was like, oh, wait, but like I could do that. Like I know exactly how smart they are, how dedicated, how hardworking they are. I'm just like them too. Like, why am I not one of them? And so that's what really inspired me to get into PR and to really start learning exactly how do you build a brand? How do you maintain a narrative? And also like, how do you kind of pivot or to grow a brand within a chosen audience?
Wow. I mean, it's very impressive, your background story. I feel like, we talked about this before too, of like we really relate with one another, right? As like first generation immigrants. And even just getting out of your own head, right? And like taking that leap is so critical. How like how do you develop your own personal brand? I know like you talked a lot about your story, but like what is it exactly? And like is it very personal to like details of your life story, or is it more professional? Like, what is it exactly?
So I see a personal brand as in essentially the image or the impression that you create about yourself in the mind of others. So like
Mm,
it's very fundamental in that respect, where it's like I think many times we hear the word brand and we're thinking,
yeah.
Kardashian, we're thinking like, Kim Kardashian when it comes to her whole brand. But like we all each already have our own personal brand, whether it's within our own immediate family, within our friend group, as the one who's
Mm,
always great, who's always got, the good restaurant list, who can always pick out like the
that is
best
true.
see? And more professionally, like, we're the ones to go to with the Excel, who's got the best Excel capabilities, who's got PowerPoint capabilities, or who's the one that you go to ask any sort of questions about like expenses even. Like we all have
Mm,
a level of brand in our day-to-day life that like we may or may not even think about as a brand. But the thing about a brand is that it can be created. It can also be shifted. It can
mm.
also be morphed, but it's a matter of combining a skills, experience, or personality that specifically make you you, that you want to really highlight, to underline for the world to see.
Oh, yeah, I
So
think highlight is the key word here.
exactly, exactly. And a business brand really is really what's being perceived by the investors, by your customers as well. And so really what I like to really break it down and break a brand down into is like, how can you be a source of knowledge to help others? How can you own your own narrative? And also, how can you make it easier for others to really find you when they're seeking
Mm.
something?
Mhm. Yep. I guess like, why is it important to have a personal brand or like articulate your personal brand? You touched a little bit upon it in terms of like it's a good way for people to find you when they need something. But I guess, if you're going about your day to day, you might not even think about it at all. So like why is it important?
I think that personal brand is so important because it's what makes us us, right? Like there's various levels of a brand to us that really create the facade of us and how the world kind of sees us. It's about also how do we see ourselves.
Mm.
I now see myself as a founder, as a mother, as a support of AAPI community, as well as Asian founders. And these were all labels that I didn't have, 5, 6 years ago, even. And this is really the brand. This is the identity. This is the narrative that I want the world now to know so that I'm able to accomplish my own set of goals, that I'm able to kind of help others in a way that's aligned with my vision for the rest of the world, for my daughter, for my friends and my community. And so I think that the importance about owning a brand is really tying back to like what is the core vision and mission that you as yourself or the company is really looking to accomplish, and how does the narrative that you're putting out there support those things? Is it in service of it or is it hindering it? And I think that really
Mm.
is the question that each individual need to ask. But once you really lean into a specific brand and once you're really working on amplifying it, really doubling down on it, that's when really you're able to create this flywheel effect of creating results that will start moving you along the path that you have charted for yourself or for your company. And so that could look like getting a promotion. That could look like getting the next round of venture funding. That could look like getting on stage to speak at Money
Mm.
2020. It's all these different various goals that we end up working towards and owning and honing the personal brand and making sure that you're doubling down on it over and over again is will be able to help you achieve those things.
You mentioned a bit about like your business or your company's like brand versus your own personal brand. I actually like have a deeper question here about that because for you, you're a founder, you're a CEO of your own company. I feel like a lot of your business brand, is tied to your own personal brand as well. But for many of us, we may be in a company where there's 500 people or 10,000 people. How do we like, should we think about our own personal brand in like separate of the company's brand? And how do we think about telling our own story when like your firm has its own story to tell?
I think that's such a great question. And I think it's one that is so nuanced and so individual. And I would encourage everyone to kind of think about that as a very specific question. Like, do you want to be associated with your company brand? And I think that's one of the things that each
Mm.
individual really need to break down for themselves and really like dig deep, meditate on that question. Is your company brand one you want to be associated with? Or do you want to create a totally separate brand? And if you want to be related to the company, how do you do it in an effective way that one serves your own purposes, but also the company's purposes? And so I've seen people do this successfully where particularly either the CEO or the executive team are usually tied to the company brand as the spokespeople of the company. They're the ones you'll see on
Mm.
CNBC, on Fox, and they're the ones who are, the economists or like head of people who are talking about hiring, economic issues that are present in the market today, and those are the ones where their personal brand is so tied to the company and their specific jobs. But for people who aren't who don't want to be or aren't tied to the company, for them I would say that they have a lot more room to play with. Like maybe it is maybe someone who just really has a passion for content creation. Maybe they're so passionate about food, or video making that like they end up becoming a food blogger on the side that has absolutely nothing to do with their company.
Mm.
And that's totally okay, right? But it's like, it's about expression of passion. It's about creating another narrative for an individual that's separate from the company that they can really lean into. But it's all about like, how does it serve the individual at the end of the day? And for them to really think through, like, is this going to be good for me in the long run? And also, who will benefit from it? And the thing that I love about this is that regardless if it's company tied or if it's specifically for the individual, it's going to serve a broader benefit always, because especially with women, especially with people of color, we're usually underrepresented across pretty much like all industries, right? And so if
Yeah.
that's the case, anything that we do to kind of put ourselves out there is going to set up the next generation as well as those around us for better and more success to come too. Because it's only going to make it easier for them to say, like, to see this as example and say, I could do that too, and see themselves in those roles too.
I really like that. I think that, one of the takeaways that I got from your answer is really about like being intentional about your brand, right? Like just to understand like what are the implications of it and like why do you want to portray this, whether it's with your like firm's identity or yours, but like it has to serve a purpose in the end. And I feel like a lot of times, right, you go about your day to day or week to week and you don't really stop and kind of assess that at all. At least I feel to, because reflecting is not easy, and reflecting on yourself, right, and your brand out there in the world. And so that
It's not
lends
easy,
me to
but
the
it
next
makes
question.
decision making
Yeah.
when opportunities come up so much easier.
Yeah.
Because whenever new things come up, because we are all strapped for time, right? And
Yeah.
so whenever new opportunities get presented, it's always easier to kind of then say, like, what is my purpose? What is my end goal here? And is this serving that specific purpose? And if not, you can easily say
Mhm.
no. Because otherwise, you're
Yeah.
just say yes to a million things. And like at the end, you're like, who am I? Like, what am I doing this for? Who am I doing this
So
for?
true. Yeah. Or like you want to accept every speaking opportunity that comes your way, and you're like, wait,
Right,
actually
because
that doesn't work for me, right? Or like right now.
right. Or just
I
simply
guess
being
how do you
grateful
assess?
too.
Yeah.
Or just being
How
grateful
do
for
you
the
assess
opportunity.
the effectiveness of your own brand narrative? Like, so like you have it now, it's out there. How do you know that it's working?
That's a great question. I think that for companies, it's a little bit easier. It's more formulaic. You're able to put out polls, you're able to do pulse checks, you're able to ask either your investors, your audience, your employees, through polls, through surveys and um those type of channels. But for an individual, it is a lot harder. For an individual, you can have conversations, you can have qualitative interviews, if you will, to kind of figure out like, how do people think about you, especially if you meet a new person. That's also a great
Mm.
indicator of exactly what your brand is. If someone's like, oh, you're Liang, and then you wait for a reaction, you like, and figure out, is that a good thing, is that a bad thing? And then you can very easily ask, like, what have you heard? And that is such a great indicator of exactly whether or not your brand narrative that you're working on is working. And then you can ask them, like, oh, where did you see that? Oh, who do we know? And then
Mm.
you can kind of like track exactly how effective it has been. And then in terms of anybody who does have like a digital footprint or like a social media footprint or some sort of executive leadership profile, it's easier then also to kind of track exactly how effective it is, either on LinkedIn algorithm or social media, website traffic, what's working, what's not, through analytics. And so that's actually another really great way of figuring out if a brand narrative is working.
Hmm. You mentioned social media. And so do you recommend everyone to be on social media to share their brand narrative? Like what mediums do you think are most effective, or is that like a very nebulous question? Like I'm talking about podcasts, blogs, newsletters, showing up at a conference, thought leadership. I mean, I feel like there's so much you could do, and sometimes I'm like overwhelmed, right?
So there's so much that you can do, especially now. I would say that like over the past 4 to 5 years with COVID, stay at home orders, like people got so comfortable on social. And like it's you can't avoid it. Like whether you're a personal brand or a professional or business brand, like you just can't avoid the digital landscape now. And I think that for a lot of individuals, social media is probably the lowest option in terms of barriers to entry. You can just sign up for an account, you can just like go about it and then figure it out along the way, play around with the various forms. And if something isn't working, you could delete the post, right? And like no harm, no foul kind of
Oh,
situation.
true. Yeah.
But it's a great place to kind of play around with. And so for people who are relatively new to it, like that's a great place to kind of start. It's also a great way to kind of build traction, figure out what's working, what is your audience. But for a professional brand, I would say that there needs to be a little bit more of a careful consideration in terms of how you go about it. There's Twitter, there's LinkedIn, there's so many various blog posts and threads that individuals as well as companies can have a presence on, that it's just like, how do you even choose? And I think the most important question is what feels most natural to you, but also where is your end audience that you want to be speaking to? And so for a B2B company, you kind of can't avoid LinkedIn. You also can't avoid various conferences, and different types of affiliate groups, where everybody from the specific industry or in this specific chosen career field are all located in. And so I think, again, kind of going back to an earlier answer, like I think the intentionality is really important of figuring out exactly like what is your end goal, what do you want to say to them, who's your audience, and then deciding what are the avenues. And then in terms of a business, again, it's like where are your audience, where's your customers, like who are the people that you want to speak to, where are they located? And I think that question, and once you have the answer, will help you figure out exactly where you need to be. For SMBs, I found that, for SMBs targeting consumers, I found that like Facebook is really great. Instagram is great. But for B2B companies, like LinkedIn is really great. For Gen Z, to speak to Gen Z, like TikTok is, you can't avoid TikTok. And so there's so many various forms of social media and digital footprint that people can make sure that they're a part of. And when it comes to traditional business media or the publications that we associate with, such as like a Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, these type of more so professional forums, they're an amazing place for credibility. And this is actually the part where this is where I really make my living, is that like I help my clients get into publications like those. And what really helps me to kind of wake up each morning and be passionate and excited about the work is that throughout the pandemic, one of the things that I really saw was that like there really is not enough an accurate representation of women as well as people of color. And for that reason, my team and I are particularly passionate about making sure that there's enough representation in the media, and various outlets, so that our stories are told. Like we have the right narrative in these publications because there is still a lot of credibility associated with it. And these are places where it's like we cannot like individually control the narrative. Like it's not like a one and done thing. Like this needs to be like an everyday active thing that we're doing every single day to get ourselves out there. Because then with credibility comes this like breadcrumb trail that we'll be able to curate in terms of a narrative that like we are successful, that we are leaders, we're founders, and that then investors will come, the awards will come, and then we will have more unicorn companies that are founded by women and people of color. And then it's just like
it's like a flywheel effect.
Exactly. And it becomes easier for all the other founders and leaders to come.
So we talked a lot about, having a personal brand, what we can do with it. And so how often would you say you should update your personal brand? And also if there was a hot topic, like something negative that we don't like about our brand that we find out, like what should we do to address it?
Yeah. So in terms of updating your personal brand, I think that someone can. Oh, I mean, I don't recommend updating it every single day. I don't recommend trying to shift the narrative like once a week. But, I think it's when I think it's about I think going back to intention, like, is it serving you? And I think every once in a while, maybe
Mm,
like a month or so, just think about it. Take like a 30 seconds. Like, is my personal brand working for me? Is this where I want to be? But as we head into 2024, I feel like New Year's are always like new year, new me, right? And so it's
yep.
kind of like you think through like who do you want to be in the new year? And I think at these junctions of thoughtfulness, of reflection, are really important times to think about, like, is it time to update my brand? Is it time for me to like start a new narrative or to shift my narrative? And I think that there isn't necessarily like a prescriptive timeline in which we need to follow, but it's a matter of question of being reflective and aware of whether or not this is serving me. And if not, then it's time to update, right? Or for someone to think about like, I think in 2024 I want a new job, or I want a totally new career. I want to
Yeah.
get out of banking and get into climate tech or something like that. And so how do that you need to be making that transition. You need to be thinking about that 6 to 9 months in advance. How do you start creating this new narrative that like you're perfect to be in the climate tech space? That type of question that then will lead you to start taking step and creating a new brand for yourself.
Wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like 6 to 9 months ahead, because even earlier you mentioned, hey, is this brand, my personal brand, serving me in terms of coming up for the next promotion? Right. I like never really thought about it that way, but it is so critical
It's
because it's about
critical.
like how other people perceive you, not exactly just the achievements you put on paper or the numbers that you pull in.
And this is one of the things I struggle with myself, was like, I want like it was like I would wake up one day and be like, okay, I'm ready for my promotion. But like nobody else saw that. No one else knew that about me. I'm like, I've done all the things, but it's like I would have
Yeah.
needed to seed that thought for so many other decision makers, like 6 to 9 months in advance, and prove to them and shown to them over and over again by accomplishing various marks that like hitting certain marks that like, yes, I am ready. And in terms of like, if we have a bad narrative out there, like, I mean, listen, everyone loves a comeback story. Everybody loves a redemption story. And I truly believe that there is no such thing as bad press. And when there is bad press, there is bad narrative. Like, think about what do you want people to know about it, or how do you kind of like look at it from a various facet? There's always like another way of looking at it, and that's okay. And sometimes even if you can't do it for yourself, like get on a call with someone who's close to you and just try to figure out with them, like, okay, help me like shift the narrative either for myself, in my own head, or like externally. And like, how do I do this? And so many times like we're so afraid to take that first step or to think about what could potentially be a new narrative. And it's okay. Like, it's more than okay. And know that there's people out there who love you for your brand, for your company, that
Mhm.
like want to help you. And seek those people out in those times and find that support, or hold you accountable to shifting your narrative.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you know what? When you put things out there, and we talked about this with Sabrina, like right before, right? Like not everyone is going to resonate with everything that you say or whatever you post. And
And
that's okay.
that's exactly, and that's okay. And
Well, thank you so much because we're like at time, but it was really helpful to even just have time to just talk about this, right? And help us sit down and reflect. I think it going out into the newsletter going for 2024 will be a big year for everyone. And having a framework to even rely on and just look at is already a small step into a big change.
yes, 100%. Well, thank you so much, Robin, for having me. And thank you to the GGV team for putting this together and allowing this conversation to happen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for jumping on right before the holiday. And for everyone out there, Happy New Year, happy holidays.